This is Ultimate Warriors, the show that looks at the knockout world of combat and the martial arts. Let's enter the Ultimate Fighting Championship, the original cage fighting competition that shocked the world, but set the standard for every tournament that has followed. Coming up, we take a look at the most famous no-holds-barred competition on the planet. And meet some of the men who climbed into the cage and lived to tell the tale. Also, the British fighter who made a big first impression in the UFC. In a world of many different fight styles and martial arts, it was only natural that they would eventually want to test their skills against one another to find out whose style was the best of the best. An early example of this happened in 1976, when heavyweight boxing champion Muhammad Ali faced Japanese pro wrestler Inoki. The fight was not spectacular, with Inoki lying on his back in the center of the ring, trying to kick Ali, who ran around refusing to get close to the dangerous grappler. It was the Japanese who kept looking for the most realistic fight promotion possible, and 15 years later they created Pancrase.
I would say it's a hybrid from all the best martial arts there are. You got judo, jiu-jitsu, sambo, karate, kyokushin, you get the Thai boxing, everything is involved.
There were no weight classes. A closed fist to the body or palm strike to the head was allowed. Kicks, knees and elbows were permitted. But when a fighter was in trouble, he could grab the rope and the opponent would have to release. It was very popular in Japan, but martial artists and fight fans worldwide wanted something more. On November the 21st, 1993, the USA gave the world the Ultimate Fighting Championship, a groundbreaking no-holds-barred fight tournament.
When the UFC first debuted, it only had two basic rules, just simply no biting, no eye gouging. After that, anything you could possibly think of was allowed, and I mean anything.
Fighters from any style of combat now had the chance to prove their skills live on television in front of millions of viewers.
Gave him the chance to come up.
The essence of the Ultimate Fighting Championship in the very beginning was to take all of these one-dimensional styles and find out which style was the best.
The first fighter to make his way into the octagon was Gerard Gordeau, a Dutch kickboxer who stood 6'5", but was half the weight of his opponent, Talia Tuli, a 410-pound sumo wrestler. The Ultimate Fighting Championship was born, even to the surprise of the other fighters waiting backstage.
I mean, everybody in the locker room was intensely watching. This is the first fight ever, man. No holds barred, dude. I mean, this is a real thing in a cage. And so the fight starts, and man, the dude charges Gerard. Gerard sidesteps, and he punches him one time, bam, hook. Then the guy falls down, and Gerard kicks him. And I swear, you seen when Gerard hit him, boom, the teeth went flying out in the audience. And I remember the announcers sitting at the booth were like, oh my God, he just kicked him in the mouth, the teeth went flying, and they just went quiet. The crowd went quiet, the announcers went quiet, the locker went quiet, and all of a sudden you heard this like, oh shit. It was on. That was the very first fight in the Ultimate Fighting Championship in the mixed martial arts world that started it all.
The first UFC was won by Royce Gracie, but the real winner was the Ultimate Fighting Championship. The fighters and fans wanted more. There were many fighters in the early days of the UFC that the fans loved to watch in action in the octagon. Royce Gracie, the jiu-jitsu master. Ken Shamrock, the world's most dangerous man. Dan the Beast Severn, a top pro wrestler. Mark the Hammer Coleman, a big hitter. Oleg Taktarov, the Russian Bear. And Mark the Titan Kerr, a ground and pound specialist. But one man brought just 2 fists to the cage and exploded onto the UFC stage in devastating fashion. His name, David Tank Abbott.
Kind of thing with balls and numbers. It was all random, and our 2 names came up first, and everybody in the audience went, ooh, and my table jumped up, yeah, this is going to be great, and everybody's like looked at the table like, what are these guys thinking? And I guess after 26 seconds they figured it out when he was laying on the ground, knocked out.
His thick goatee, toothless grin and heavy right hand instantly earned him the official position of UFC bad boy. He described himself as an anti-martial artist, and beer-swilling fans across America fell in love with him. So whilst fighters train in many different styles, did Tank Abbott really fall off a bar stool and into the octagon?
My style is a street fighting style. It's a bar brawling style. It's not that I don't have skills. I mean, I can wrestle, I can box, I know submission, but I lay my ears back and I come at you. It's not about skill. It's about what you have in your heart. You're a warrior in your mind, in your heart, and in your soul, and that's who I am. So.
Whatever the style Tank was using, it was working with devastating effect. Next up was Paul Verilands in the semi-final of UFC 6. After 1 minute 51, the referee stopped the fight, and Tank was in the final. There he would face Russian Sambo expert Oleg Taktarov. Tank would lose after 18 minutes of an absolute war, but the fans had found an all-American hero.
But back then he was training seriously. He was strong. Plus the problem was for me he had no neck, so he couldn't put the guillotine choke on him. It's got to be a rear choke, which I realized and took 18 minutes to get to his back.
Yeah, it was a great war actually, and I've described it as the best 18 minutes of my life. You know, it was real fun. Me and Oleg shared something good that night, maybe something great.
The loss to Taktarov was Tank's first in the UFC. He fought 15 times over 3 years in the octagon, losing 7 contests. But these were against technically better fighters, like Dan Severn and Don Fry, who easily avoided Abbott's big punches and out-wrestled him on the floor. Win or lose, he remained the fans' favourite. But whilst they loved him, his fellow fighters weren't as kind.
Tank Abbott is a 9th-degree black belt in Bar Sando, the ancient art of barroom brawling.
You know, he is the unathlete. I've had 50 Tank Abbotts walk through this door and walk straight back out after they're cleaning up their puke because they won't last me 10 minutes here training.
Oh, he doesn't know this, he doesn't know that. They don't know what I know. These guys that make comments like that, I think they're really talking about themselves. They're not talking about me, you know. He doesn't know technique. Why would you say something like that? I know technique. I've been wrestling since I've been 9 years old. I've been boxing for 12 years. I've been in submission for the last 6, 7 years. But that doesn't make me tough. I don't need to know all those things, and I'd still kick the majority of these people's asses.
After a 5-year break, Tank Abbott decided to return to the cage in Atlantic City. On a cold February night, the fans turned up once again to cheer on their hero.
Everyone likes a one-punch fighter. Everyone likes to see the knockout, you know?
Yeah.
It's a brawler.
No brainer, no training, no nothing. Just go in there and get it done.
He's the one that turned this into something very popular.
Oh, it's so good to see him back in the UFC. I haven't watched one in a while since he left, but now that he's back, we came all the way like 4 hours to see him fight.
In his much-anticipated comeback, Tank stepped into the octagon once more to face young fighter Frank Mir.
Get ready, here we go. Big takeout. Gonna look for the big right early.
The expectant crowd chanted his name, but Tank was forced to quit just 45 seconds into the contest. Mir outsmarted the big brawler by catching him in an extremely painful submission move. Not the return either Tank or the UFC wanted, but Tank was still pleased to be back.
Went out there, gave it what I got caught. I lost the fight. I don't like to lose a fight, and I don't like to lose that way.
then again, I don't know if I'd like to win that way either, but he still won. I ain't gonna take anything away from him, so have a cocktail and I'll see you guys later.
Whilst not being the most technically gifted fighter, Tank Abbott has played an important part in taking the UFC to mainstream America, who firstly embraced him and subsequently his sport, helping make the UFC the success it is today. Up next, we get it on with the man who has been in with all the biggest stars. It's referee Big John McCarthy. And we enter the octagon with the British fight star hoping to take the UFC by storm.
Why, he is indeed the world's strongest man. Let's take a look at Nationwide TV and Bill Kazmaier.
If you've got Bupa health insurance, you can get treatment in no time. Okay, well, how about this Friday?
Great. Clipping.
Bupa, for health and care people.
Hello. When you want a personal loan, you can just go to your bank.
Against Nikita Koloff, a test of strength. It all comes up later. This is WNN News.
Lady Rhodes, I hear you've been shooting off that big mouth of yours about wanting a shot at my...
Politicians and conservative America, even though it was hugely popular.
It was a tremendous hit. It was a runaway hit because you had people interested in the mystique of the martial arts, and you also had people interested in the fact that, my God, someone could actually die. And once again, you know, this was something that the UFC itself was saying. And I think that, you know, it gave way to a very large audience, but at the same time, it also gave a lot of ammunition to the politicians who definitely sought to have it banned.
The shows continued, but there were less and less places for the UFC to go. Hounded by Senator John McCain, it was finding life tough as he continued his campaign to ban the Ultimate Fighting Championship. His argument was that boxing rules say you cannot hit a man on the floor or below the waist. The senator declared that any transgression of these rules was barbaric. He was portraying the UFC as savage and dangerous. But was it any more dangerous than boxing?
I think even the hardcore, when they were calling it no holds barred and the whole hardcore, there was never really a serious injury in the UFC ever. It was more perception. In the beginning, it was marketed as the bloodiest, most brutal, violent sport in the world. 2 men enter, 1 man leaves, but it was really all hype for marketing. This really is it's a sport. The difference between this sport and boxing, you know, people try to compare it to boxing a lot. These guys don't take the head blows that boxers take. The sport is actually a lot safer than people really realize.
The senator was so wrong. As studies show, on average, a boxer takes over 500 punches to the head in a 12-round fight. But in the UFC, there were very few knockouts because without a protective boxing glove, a fighter can easily break his hand and therefore cannot fight. The UFC battled on, but eventually agreed for fighters to wear 6-ounce gloves. But this allowed the warriors to punch harder with no hand damage. Knockouts went up, and the politicians had actually made the sport more dangerous. But whilst the fighters couldn't rely on the politicians to ensure their safety, there is one man who has been keeping them safe since the first UFC show in 1993, and he makes sure they fight clean and fair.
My name is Big John McCarthy, and I'm a referee for the UFC.
Are you ready? Well, let's get it on!
My role in the fight is I'm there for the fighter's safety. That's my major role. It's to make sure that the fighters are safe as far as they come in healthy, and we want them to leave as healthy as possible. Obviously, when you have any kind of combative sport, you can have injuries, and I can't prevent all injuries, and it's never going to happen. But what we're there to prevent is a fighter that cannot defend themselves is not going to be injured any further than what has happened. That's my role.
John is one of the most familiar sights in the UFC, always ensuring the fighters stick to the rules and keeping them safe in the octagon. A bit like his day job as the law enforcement officer.
As a police officer, you do things and you try to keep yourself emotionally unattached from what's going on. You just do what is the right thing to do. And that's what you try to do as a referee. It's the same thing. You know, you go out and you want to perform your job doing the right thing. Sometimes, you know, you're going to be involved in things where you might have a specific feeling about something, but that's not what your job is. Your job is to do what the law is. And when it comes to officiating in mixed martial arts, your job is to do what the rules are.
As always, the ultimate.
But on a fight weekend, Big John doesn't just turn up and take center stage in the octagon. He is now an important part of the UFC safety process, checking the fighters' gloves when they weigh in and have their medicals, and most importantly, holding the rules meeting where fighters have a chance to ask any questions if they're unsure about what they're getting themselves into.
If you're swinging and your opponent turns their head and it hits the back of their head, we're going to tell you adjust your punch, but the opponent caused the blow to hit where it did. It wasn't you. It's a good strike. If you hear us tell you to adjust, and that means if you hit them again there and their head hasn't changed, then you're starting to strike in an area where we're going to tell you is not allowed to the back of the head, so change where you're striking, okay?
Despite all the preparation before a fight, John is quick to point out he is only human and sometimes gets it wrong in the octagon.
And this one is...
Now, with as many fights as I've done, I mean, it's impossible to say, have I done the right thing every time? No, not even close. I wish I had. I wish I was that perfect. There's fights that I have definitely let go too long. There's fights I look back and wish that I had stopped it much sooner. Normally, the ones that I make that are for fighter safety, that doesn't bother me. It's the ones that I make late where the fighter could have been injured because I wasn't fast enough. Those are the ones that bother me.
Well, let's get it on!
Despite the odd wrong call, Big John McCarthy will continue to rule the octagon, making sure the warriors that enter it fight safe and fight fair. In 2002, the Ultimate Fighting Championship hit the UK. For its 38th show, it decided to try and crack the British market, so it put on a memorable show in London. But like the US press in the mid-90s, the UK media reacted in disgust that this controversial event had come to town. But the fans turned out in their thousands as a sold-out Royal Albert Hall played host to the biggest cage fighting show in the world. One UK fighter invited to enter the octagon was Ian the Machine Freeman. The shaven-headed British fighter sent the crowd wild when he beat the highly fancied Frank Mir by a technical knockout.
You want to continue? You want out? You want to continue? All right, go.
But that was nothing compared to when Gloucester's Mark Weir stepped up for his UFC debut to face American Kevin Jackson.
Please welcome the Wizard, Mark Weir!
I knew I had the advantage was my legs, because the thing is, my legs are just as quick as my hands, and I can to pick it up to someone's head height and make it do what I want. It's just like reaching out and just touching somebody. So what I did, I threw my legs in front of him just to get his arms out of the way, just to smack him on the arm. But what it did, it actually hooked his arm and brought it down to his waist. So as he's moving in at the same time, it's the worst thing because his arms are by his waist, and it allowed me to actually run in with my punch, which created more impact. Because if I'm moving in at 30 miles an hour and he's coming at me 30 miles, that's a 60 mile an hour punch. And it landed and, you know, it caught him, dazed him, he's out. When he hit the ground, I tried to make sure that he was finished, basically. He's just come back around, and as they do in the UFC and mixed martial arts, they just pushed me straight off. That was it. He wasn't defending himself. It was a quick win. It was great, but it's living up to that hype I've done it, because everybody expected me to do the same.
Mark had recorded one of the fastest knockouts in UFC history. The Brits were coming.
Mark was someone that people in the UFC and everyone that knew mixed martial arts understood he had a very good chance of winning that fight. I didn't think anyone predicted he would knock him out that fast, but he had a great debut.
After such an explosive debut, Mark was invited to fight at UFC 40 in a sold-out MGM Grand Arena in Las Vegas.
I've always wanted to go there. I don't think there's anybody who doesn't want to go there, you know, just to actually see the place. The main thing I didn't want to do is get daunted by, you know, get flooded by the amusement of everything there, the casinos, you name it. So the main thing, I made a pact with myself that I wouldn't take a notice of anything except one day, and that's after I finished competing.
In front of 20,000 fight fans, he faced Philip Miller, and it was all-out war. Both men had their chances to win, but eventually Weir ran out of energy, and Miller won the contest by choking Weir to a submission.
As soon as the fight started, I knew what he was going to do. You know, I kicked the hand and he shot straight in. And I knew he was going to try and do that. He got me to the ground and stuff, so I went to the ground. So I thought I could get a submission, but he kept jumping and jumping and trying to get out of my guard. And luckily I only got him in a half guard. So hence I reckon I probably could have finished it early, which wouldn't have been in my favour, because I think the biggest thing I learned from that fight was about 7 minutes in, is that because of the travelling and that 11 hours flight, is that the recuperation is not the same. But what happens is like when you've got forces of nature acting on you, you got to start being wiser. If you start feeling yourself sapping, just start slowing down the pace and picking your shots a bit more. So I learned a lot from the fight.
But even in defeat, the British Lionheart had impressed the UFC with his skills and fighting spirit in the octagon. Despite the loss, Mark fights on and still dreams of becoming an ultimate fighting champion. With a little luck and hard training, it might just come true.
If you get that UFC title belt, I reckon it's one of the greatest belts, bar none, in the world to have.
Next time on Ultimate Warriors, we spend one night in Bangkok and enter the tough, brutal world of kickboxing, where fighters try to kick, elbow and punch their way to a better life.
Tomorrow night at 10, the big build-up starts when